The day waned, and as its light faded away, I became possessed by a vague uneasiness, an anxiety such as the sleeper feels when sad, real sounds fall continuously within his ear, low, distant bell tones, solemn at long but equal intervals, and commingling with melancholy dreams. Night arrived, and with its shadows a heavy discomfort. It oppressed my limbs with the oppression of some dull weight, and was palpable. There was also a moaning sound, not unlike the first twilight had grown in which there was also a moaning sound, not unlike distant reverberation of surf, the distant reverberation of surf, but more continuous, which, beginning with the first twilight, had grown in strength with the darkness. Suddenly lights were brought into the room, and this reverberation became forthwith interrupted into frequent, unequal bursts of the same sound, but less dreary and less distinct. The ponderous oppression was in a great measure relieved, and issuing from the flame of each lamp, for there were many, there flowed unbrokenly into my ears a strain of melodious monotone. And when now, dear Una, approaching the bed upon which I lay outstretched, you sat gently by my side, breathing odor from your sweet lips, and pressing them upon my brow, there arose tremulously within my bosom, and mingling with the merely physical sensations which circumstances had called forth, a something akin to sentiment itself, a feeling that half appreciating, half responded to your earnest love and sorrow. But this feeling took no root in the pulseless heart, and seemed indeed rather a shadow than a reality, and faded quickly away, first into extreme quiescence, and then into a purely sensual pleasure as before. And now from the wreck and the chaos of the usual senses there appeared to have arisen within me a sixth, all perfect. In its exercise I found a wild delight, yet a delight still physical, inasmuch as the understanding in it had no part. Motion in the animal frame had fully ceased. No muscle quivered, no nerve thrilled, no artery throbbed, but there seemed to have sprung up in the brain that of which no words could convey to the merely human intelligence even an indistinct conception. Let me term it a mental pendulous pulsation. It was the moral embodiment of man's abstract idea of time. By the absolute equalization of this movement, or of such as this, had the cycles of the firmamental orbs themselves been adjusted. By its aid I measured the irregularities of the clock upon the mantel, and of the watches of the attendants. Their tickings came sonorously to my ears. The slightest deviation from the true proportion, and these deviations were omniprevalent, affected me just as violations of abstract truth are wont on earth to affect the moral sense. Although no two of the timepieces in the chamber struck individual seconds accurately together, yet I had no difficulty in holding steadily in mind the tones and the respective momentary errors of each. And this keen, perfect, self-existing sentiment of duration, this sentiment existing as man could not possibly have conceived it to exist, independently of any succession of events, this idea, this sixth sense, upspringing from the ashes of the rest, was the first obvious and certain step of the intemporal soul upon the threshold of the temporal eternity. It was midnight, and you still sat by my side. All others had departed from the chamber of death. They had deposited me in the coffin. The lamps burned flickeringly. For this I knew by the tremulousness of the monotonous strains, but suddenly these strains diminished in distinctness and in volume. Finally they ceased. The perfume in my nostrils died away. Forms affected my vision no longer. The oppression of the darkness uplifted itself from my bosom. A dull shock, like that of electricity, pervaded my frame, and was followed by total loss of the idea of contact. All of what man has termed sense was merged into the sole consciousness of entity, and in the one abiding sentiment of duration, the mortal body had been at length stricken with the hand of the deadly decay. Yet had not all of sentience departed, for the consciousness and the sentiment remaining supplied some of its functions by a lethargic intuition. I appreciated the direful change now in operation upon the flesh, and as the dreamer is sometimes aware of the bodily presence of one who leans over him, So, sweet Una, I still dully felt that you sat by my side. So too, when the noon of the second day came, I was unconscious of those movements which displaced you from my side, which confined me within the coffin, which deposited me within the hearse, which bore me to the grave, which lowered me within it, which heaped heavily the mould upon me, and which thus left me in blackness and corruption to my sad and solemn slumbers with the worm. And here in the prison house, which has few secrets to disclose, there rolled away days and weeks and months, and the soul watched narrowly each second as it flew, and without effort took record to its flight, without effort and without object. A year passed, the consciousness of being had grown hourly more distinct, and that of mere locality had, in great measure, usurped its position. The idea of entity was becoming merged in that of place. The narrow space immediately surrounding what had been the body was now going to be the body itself. At length, as often happens to the sleeper, by sleep and its world alone is death imaged. At length, as sometimes happened on earth to the deep slumberer, when some flitting light half startled him into a waking, yet left him half enveloped in dreams, so to me, in the strict embrace of the shadow, came that light which alone might have had power to startle, the light of enduring love. Men toiled at the grave in which I lay darkling. They upthrew the damp earth upon my mouldering bones. There descended the coffin of Una. And now again all was void. The nebulous light had been extinguished. That feeble thrill had vibrated itself into quiescence. Many lustra had supervened. Dust had returned to dust. The worm had food no more. The sense of being had at length utterly departed, and there reigned in its stead, instead of all things dominant and perpetual, the autocrats, place and time. For that which was not, for that which had no form, for that which had no thought, for that which had no sentience, for that which was soulless, yet of which matter formed no portion. For all this nothingness, yet for all this immortality, the grave was still a home, and the corrosive hours comates.